are listening to a free version of the Majority Report with Sam Steeder. To support the show and get another 15 minutes of daily program, go to majority.fm, please.
The Majority Report with Sam Steeder.
It is Wednesday, January 29th, 2020. My name is Sam Steeder. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, the Trump team ends their opening defense. Mitch McConnell fears he doesn't have the votes to stop witnesses. Meanwhile, as the senators begin the questioning session, 3 Democrats may vote to acquit. And apparently Dianne Feinstein has no idea where she is. Meanwhile, we are 5 days away from the Iowa Caucus. And the opposition fire on Sanders takes flight. Palestinians reject the Trump-Palestinian land giveaway plan. Meanwhile, Trump signs the new NAFTA, and Nancy Pelosi did not get her photo op. There were no Democrats in attendance, uninvited. Joe Biden seeks a popular front with Amy Klobuchar. And Trump allies target black voters with cash giveaway. Lastly, Democratic strategists are worried about Trump's data operation. All this and more on today's program. We got a narrow playing field, as it were, today, ladies and gentlemen, in terms of topics. Narrow but deep, right? We've got all the greatest hits. A long-awaited Middle East peace plan. This is we understand now why Bibi Netanyahu basically said, "Okay, you can indict me, or you can go ahead with charges in Israel," because he was basically planning to release this plan with Jared Kushner. It's unclear to me, but Netanyahu seems to be indicated that he's going to move ahead with this peace plan without having the other party sign on to it, which is basically going to mean that they're going to annex a bunch of land. And this has been the strategy of the Israeli government for, I think, a couple of decades, which is create facts on the ground so that they have to be dealt with later. It's sort of similar to the don't ask for permission, or better to apologize later than ask for permission. And in this instance, they're just not even going to apologize. It's just going to be what are we going to do? Can't move it. It's already there. We will get into that a little bit today if we have time. Maybe in the coming days we should have somebody on. Maybe Michael will have somebody on tomorrow. I'm not sure.
It's possible.
It may even be possible he may not be here. I have no idea. We do have a little bit of a skeletal crew today. Brendan on the board. Dorsey on the video monitor. David is working the couch today, and that's going good. But fear not, we're all here. Just a reminder, next week we're going to be doing live coverage of the Iowa caucuses. If you are caucusing, if you're in Iowa, call us. I'm not sure exactly when we're going to start. Probably about 5 p.m.-ish, maybe 6 p.m.-ish Iowa time. So before the caucuses actually start. Some of you may be trying to get people to the caucuses. Obviously, that's far more important. But, call when you're in the van. I don't know. Or in the car. And then on Tuesday night, assuming that the State of the Union happens, I don't know if Donald Trump is going to punt it if they're still doing the impeachment hearings. But if the State of the Union happens, we're going to cover it. If they call for witnesses, We don't know if that's going to happen. I'm going to dig into that in a bit. We may cover that. We are going to be covering the Friday night debate live. I don't know who's going to be here. I know Brendan will.
Oh, yeah.
But, and I will. And then we'll see. But things are going to get a little crazy. Things are crazy. Things are a little bit crazy right now, and they're going to get a little crazy. Just a reminder, this show relies on your support. You can become a member at jointhemajorityreport.com. When you do, we give you extra content. You may not realize this, but this show is 2.5 hours, if we're lucky, every day now. And so if you're hearing only the first, well, now these days it's been going like an hour and 10 minutes, but if you're hearing only the first part of the show, you should check out what you're missing and just support the free show. You get the full show and with no ads, and you keep this show going. Also, check out the AM Quickie. It is available on our app at majorityapp.com. You can sign up for it directly at amquickie.com. Let's get into this. I'm not the only person who apparently is feeling the stress of all the news these days. Donald Trump was in New Jersey, and he spent, I watched parts of this speech. He spent about 15, 20 minutes basically pretending that, like, well, you know, I could have gone to the Meadowlands, which is a much bigger arena, but I didn't want to, or something. You know, he was basically pretending like, and I think at one point Sean Hannity said there was 100,000 people trying to get in. This is a venue that seats 7,000 people. This is like, I don't know, where would you put this in terms of like a band, like a middling, not even a middling band, right? I guess a middling band.
Yeah, this is like a casino touring type band.
There you go, 7,000. And they're doing okay. And apparently his tanning booth must be in the neighborhood. That could be it. That's why he didn't want to move it. He got an extra tan. And he seems to be, there seems to be a race amongst all of the candidates and really everyone in the news. Because we'll talk about Dianne Feinstein. We'll talk about, that they can't articulate anything. Here is Donald Trump. And the best part is this is brought to you by Fox News. Even at Fox, they realize the guy's falling apart. You can hear them laughing as they cut away from him because he's falling apart.
Jurisdiction of Middlesex County defied the ICE request to detain him. Local authorities released him, and he went on to commit a gruesome triple murder. Happens. I could read these cases, honestly. I could read and state these cases to you all night. No American should ever be hurt, harmed, or killed because left-wing politicians, Democrats, decided to shield and shelter criminal. Look, wait. You have criminals.
All right. We're watching the president here in Wildwood, New Jersey. I just want to get a quick comment before we.
Can we go back and just hear what happened there? Like, it's as if like the teleprompter like just went away. Incidentally, I don't know if anybody remembers. I mean, folks may be too young to remember this, but we spent about 3 years in this country talking about how the right did, how Barack Obama was nothing without his teleprompter. I don't know if people remember that, but that was like when we talk about like, oh, there's a scandal. They've had to remove another person from the White House because they have been beating their spouse, or that half the dozen people. We don't have any actually confirmed people in the cabinet. They're all acting, and they have no experience of what they're doing. Or maybe it's going to be World War III tomorrow, or all the.
We're trying to kill a. Marie Ivanovich.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. We might be taking out one of our own, ambassadors because there's some type of drug deal going on in Ukraine. It used to be the big scandal was Barack Obama uses a teleprompter or Barack Obama has a tan suit. That's what politics used to be. Here is Donald Trump again. I don't know what happens here, but his brain just sort of goes on the fritz.
Democrats decided to shield and shelter criminal. Look, wait. You have criminals.
What? And they're laughing at him. Unbelievable. Criminal. Look, wait. What? Very, very strange. I think the impeachment is wearing on him. yesterday, Mitch McConnell announced that he did not have the votes to preclude witnesses. Now, here is, let's play this. The thing that people should understand is that, and who was it that was on? It was Blumenthal, right? Blumenthal. Here is where Chuck Schumer is failing us a little bit. Here is Richard Blumenthal. Let's play this. It's clear McConnell now does not have the votes. That does not mean that he won't have the votes to prevent witnesses. They're going to put up for a vote. I don't know when that vote's going to come, in the next day or two. And the question is, should we have witnesses? And then subsequent to that vote, it could be, who should we call? Should we call Hunter Biden? Should we call John Bolton? They only need 51 votes. The Republicans control this process. And here's Richard Blumenthal, and this is a perfect example of like how badly Chuck Schumer has done at this. Because the fact that we could be at this point in the impeachment and it's not a fact that is in the forefront of everyone's mind is a problem of messaging, period. Here's Richard Blumenthal on with Chris Cuomo.
I hear you on that. But now what happens? Let's say you get the witnesses, okay? And they say, fine, you can have Bolton. We want Joe Biden.
Well, Joe Biden or Hunter Biden, who is more likely to be requested, they're saying is part of a quid pro quo. I don't think that we can do a quid pro quo trade on witnesses in an impeachment trial involving an alleged corrupt quid pro quo. More to the point.
But you don't have the votes, Senator.
Well, they can call Hunter Biden or Joe Biden.
That's right.
At any point. They have the majority.
Yeah.
And you know the reason that they haven't called them. They don't want them as witnesses because they don't want to prolong the trial and they don't want necessarily to turn it into a circus. What they have done in the course of this trial is try to continue the smear of the former vice president and his son. And that's what they're trying to put on the Senate floor if they insist on this witness trade. But
pause it. Okay. So the look on Chris Cuomo when it's like suddenly occurs to him like, hey, wait a second. That's right. They haven't called him yet. They're not going to call him. Or maybe they will. But the bottom line is every single person who even remotely touches upon this should be aware of the fact that there's need to be an exchange here of witnesses. The Democrats should not be even entertaining that question because they have no control over it. They shouldn't be saying, don't call this person or don't, because it's not their call. It is up to the Republicans. If the Bidens come, they could vote on this today. And Joe Biden would be subpoenaed and Hunter Biden would be subpoenaed. Chuck Schumer should be in the news every day going, look, if the Republicans want to call Hunter Biden, they call Hunter Biden. He has nothing to do with this case. If they want to call Beyonce, they should call Beyonce. They should call Beyonce and then we can get her autograph. It has nothing to do with the case. You should call maybe Matt Damon or let's get, Jimmy Kimmel to come in. It'll be fun for everybody, but it's not going to have anything to do with this case. All we're asking is for witnesses who have pertinent information. Whoever the Republicans decide they're going to call, they're going to call. They have 51 votes. They could call anyone. They could call Hillary Clinton. They call Bill Clinton. They could exhume Vince Foster, have him show up at the hearing. They could do anything that they want. All we're asking is to have relevant witnesses. This is the way that you message this. With all due respect to Blumenthal from Connecticut, the whole quid pro quo and turning that on its head as if like the way we're going to say quid pro quo over and over again is they're asking for a quid pro quo. Even we were talking about a quid pro quo. Look, that's very clever, but this is very simple. Republicans can call whoever they want. They have a choice. They can either call relevant or irrelevant witnesses. And if they're going to call irrelevant witnesses like Hunter Biden or Joe Biden, then they might as well also get some people in who'll be interesting and entertaining for everybody. So maybe the senators can get like an autograph. I met Beyonce today. That's what Chuck Schumer would do if he was competent at his job. He would use his platform to educate and to frame this to the extent that he can. Obviously, like, he doesn't have 51 votes, but he can make Chris Cuomo, who every night is interviewing Democrats about this very topic, not be surprised when he's reminded that the Republicans can call whoever they want. That is a failure of messaging. This is just very basic stuff. Very basic stuff. It's sad. All right. We're going to get back to impeachment in a minute. And then I want to read a couple of pieces by David Frum and Jonathan Chait, because it is important for Democrats and particularly supporters of Bernie Sanders to at least address the question of electability so that they can respond to these things to some extent. I mean, it's far more important to knock on doors and whatnot, but on some level, this is the terrain that we're playing on, because certain questions need to be resolved before we get into the general. But before we do, let me just say this. There's a lot of people out there. There was a lot of attention paid to that Peloton thing. Their whole messaging campaign to talk about crazy. That was crazy. But if you want to get fit in 2020, you don't have to join a gym. You don't have to pay a ton for overpriced fitness equipment. The best way to get in shape, the best shape of your life, is with Echelon. You go to echelonfit.com, ECHELON, fit.com, to discover their EX1 connected fitness bike that offers a high-quality, at-home cycling experience at less than half the price of a Peloton. This is huge now. People do spinning constantly. Echelon makes some beautifully engineered products for everyone. The busy moms, busy dads, first responders, elite athletes. Whatever your activity level, there's an Echelon for you. And with daily live and on-demand studio classes right in your home, you never have to step foot in a gym. This is basically the way that I live my life, is that because I'm extremely busy. And if I don't have it in front of me, I won't engage in it. Whether that's like these documents that I need over here, or I'm supposed to clean those clothes. I got to put it in. I have to see it to remember, to remind myself to do it. So I can't fit one in my apartment, but having a bike at home would be super helpful. Like I say, they have daily live and on-demand studio classes. You're going to love Echelon, and you'll be joining the hundreds of thousands of men and women who are getting fit with their bikes and in on-demand studio classes already. The beautiful thing about Echelon, if you're not 100% satisfied, they give you all your money back. You don't have to pay a ton for a Peloton. Does that rhyme? Don't pay a ton for a Peloton? Buy an Echelon bike today for under $1,000. But get this, if you go to echelonfit.com/Sam to let you learn about their limited time offer. It's only for 2 more days, I think. So you got to do this right now. You get a free Apple iPad. Check it out. You get the complete details of this exclusive offer. Echelon, it's your time. That's Echelon, ECHELON, fit.com/Sam. echelonfit.com/Sam. All right, a couple more clips of what's going on with impeachment. Here is Jay Sekulow. I don't know how to pronounce his name. He is the brother of the guy that we played a clip of yesterday, who really seemed to be extremely distracted on television. And Sekulow is making a very strained argument. I mean, they've been going back and forth with this stuff. They've been having a lot of problems because I think they went into this week assuming that the way they were going to play this was, look, We're going to pretend that this really didn't happen. We're going to argue on the facts that he didn't do a quid pro quo. We're going to play Sondland saying, I presumed it was a quid pro quo. Everything that I gathered was a quid pro quo. The only time he said the words quid pro quo were when he said, I wasn't doing it. So you had Sondland in there who basically was saying, like, I observed all these things that led me to believe it was a quid pro quo. But when I asked him, he said, no, it's not. And so that's what I think they were hanging their hats on. And then John Bolton's book leaks, and they have a problem. And so Sikalo, I don't think he had the time to change what he was going to do.
You cannot impeach a president on an unsourced allegation. But what Professor Dershowitz was saying, even if everything in there was true.
All right, so pause it. He is saying that the allegation is unsourced. That is the allegation. He's talking about the manuscript. The manuscript that was sourced to John Bolton. It's John Bolton's manuscript. If they are worried about the allegation being unsourced, there's a way to remedy that. That is, announce that you're going to vote to have John Bolton come in. And this is a problem for him. So they have to move to this Dershowitz argument, which is bizarre. And people have made this point. But here, let's hear Sikalo sort of pivot here. So go back to the beginning. So we'll just hear.
Now, to be specific, you cannot impeach a president on an unsourced allegation. But what Professor Dershowitz was saying, even if everything in there was true, it constitutionally doesn't rise to that level. But I want to be clear on this, because there's a lot of speculation out there. With regard to what John Bolton has said, which referenced a number of individuals, we'll start with the president. Here's what the president said in response to that New York Times piece. I never told John Bolton that the aid to Ukraine was tied to investigations into Democrats, including the Bidens. In fact, he never complained about this at the time of his very public termination. If John Bolton said this, it was only to sell a book. The Department of Justice. While the Department of Justice has not reviewed Mr. Bolton's manuscript, the New York Times account of his conversation grossly mischaracterizes what Attorney General Barr and Bolton discussed. There was no discussion of personal favors or undue influence on investigations, nor did the Attorney General state that the President's conversations with foreign leaders were improper. The Vice President's Chief of Staff issued a statement. In every conversation
we don't even have to. All he's doing is saying we have one story that everybody's arguing, call the witness. They're afraid to do it. He doesn't realize that he's making an argument to bring in a witness. And as far as Dershowitz's argument is, there's no such thing as abuse of power if you're a president. The president can do whatever he wants. If the president decides that he wants to, I don't know, the people are using this example with Alaska, and the president decides he wants to give it to Alaska to Russia, he can do that. No, he can't. Or to the extent that he can, this is what this whole trial is about. This is a political process, and everyone knows it, and everybody was talking about that. And it's a political process. We're making a political determination. Where are we drawing the lines as to what constitutes abuse of power if you're the president? I happen to think that there's about a half dozen other things they could include in this argument. They wanted to keep it simple, fine. But the bottom line is, the defenses that they have are lame.
How is it that the White House had this manuscript checking for, intelligence and things like that, like national security concerns, for a month, and the White House defense seems to be completely flat-footed? Easy.
They just thought, we're not going to tell anybody about it.
But not even your defense?
Oh, they knew about it.
Coordinating with?
They knew about it, but what is there to say? I mean, other than like if it leaks, I'm going to say he's just writing it for a book. I mean, they're doing the only defense they can. But the fact is you have over a dozen people who basically say, everything I saw looked like a duck. And now John Bolton is like, yeah, he told me it was a duck. He said, I'm going to build a duck. I mean, there's no, what is the other evidence that you could have? Like literally, like, oh, here's a receipt from Donald Trump saying you gave me part, I'm not giving you part of the bribe until you give me the other part of the bribe. That's about it. This is how badly they're flailing. Sean Hannity, who is now like, moving into, well, I don't know. Sean Hannity's always been in this territory, but, the idea that there was 100,000 people at the Trump's rally, I mean, it just gives you a sense of just sort of how out of it they are. And what's been beautiful about this moment, yesterday, I think the other day we played a clip of Hannity, and he keeps talking about the 4 facts. In fact, they have graphics for it now. They have they have a whole package that they roll out. Jim Jordan's 4 facts. And it just shows you, well, watch this. This is Sean Hannity's there with Jim Jordan, Mark Meadows, and Louis Gohmert. My God.
The new Mount Rushmore.
Exactly.
Jim Jordan, 4 facts never change. And why is that relevant again tonight?
Pause it for a second. What are they laughing at? They all laugh. Like Jordan laughs after he says 4 facts haven't changed, like because Jordan doesn't know what he's talking about. Louis Gohmert laughs because Jim Jordan's laughing. It's very strange, these guys. They're all basically like, we all have to look like we're not worried about any of this. So laugh. Everybody laugh.
Jim Jordan, 4 facts never change. And why is that relevant again tonight? Because let's say John Bolton said the president vented. The president said, they better do this or they're not getting any money. The 4th fact is, of your facts, the 4th fact is, it doesn't matter, does it? Because he didn't do it.
Right. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Right. The 4 facts. Yeah. The 4 facts. He has no idea what he's talking about. Jim Jordan just threw this out. I mean, Jim Jordan has spent, I'm sure his congressional career and certainly his wrestling coach career, just sort of throwing stuff out there. And sometimes you lose track of it. 4 facts. Uh-huh. What? Right. Yeah, of course. We're all here. Pretty stunning. So that is, we're moving into the questioning period in terms of, let's hear this. We'll do this last one here with Ted Cruz. They're going to start to move into the questioning. Mitch McConnell has said that he doesn't have the votes to stop a vote to call witnesses. There's a couple reasons why Mitch McConnell may be doing this, but the biggest one I could imagine is that he is hoping that he is basically putting a flare up, and this is going to activate outside groups and voters to call in and tell Republican senators vote against having witnesses. And so this is where they're at this point. Here is Ted Cruz.
One point that explains why the president is innocent and he should be acquitted and why he will be acquitted. Quid pro quo doesn't matter. It's a red herring. It doesn't matter if there was a quid pro quo or not. The reason is a president is always justified and, in fact, has a responsibility to investigate credible evidence of corruption. The Democrats built their entire case on the proposition that it was baseless and a sham and phony to investigate corruption, to investigate Burisma and the Bidens. You've done a good job of walking through the reality, which is there was a mountain of evidence. Now, do I know for a fact that Joe Biden was corrupt? No.
Okay. This is another example of the Democratic messaging failure, because as you hear that, there should be a very, very obvious response. And that very, very obvious response is, Donald Trump hid it all. He has every right to investigate corruption. But the bottom line is he didn't tell anybody. The Pentagon had signed off there was no corruption. The Office of the OMB, the Management and the Budget, they had no idea why the money was not being released. Donald Trump does not have to have a mod squad or some type of like A-team that secretly seeks out corruption. He has the entire full force of the U.S. government when they're giving money. He has the Pentagon. He has the Department of Justice. He has the State Department. He has the Office of Management and Budget. They all are part of this process. There would be no one saying like Donald Trump is sussing out corruption. Oh, that's problematic. No, he lied to all those people. They tried to keep it quiet. They kept it from the Senate. It was stated U.S. policy to fight corruption in Ukraine. That's why Joe Biden went over in the first place. This should be in the forefront of everyone's minds. That the point is Donald Trump hid it from his own government. People didn't know why the money wasn't released. And if he was fighting corruption, that's something he would brag about at the moment, or even just tell people about at the moment. If you're looking to root out systemic corruption in a country and you're the president of the United States, you don't have to have your own personal lawyer and a mod squad full of Igor Frumans and Lev Parnases to go surreptitiously to suss it out. You have the full force of the United States government. And that, again, is also a messaging failure. We should know that. Everyone should know that. That should be in the forefront of everyone's mind. But the problem is like the argument has been made. Everybody just assumes that it stays in there. This is a political process. The value of this is to put pressure on, in this instance, to put pressure on a half a dozen senators in the Republican Party and ultimately the House members of the Republican Party. And if you're not doing politics, and I'm not even saying like you have to go out there and you could just talk about the facts of the case and the facts of the process, you're failing. They're lucky that there's such a mountain of obvious evidence that despite the political failures that we're seeing by the leadership of the Democrats in the Senate, despite that, the facts are so stacked against Trump in this instance that it's putting pressure on people like Susan Collins because everybody can figure it out. All right, let's turn to 2020. There has been, let's put up this ad. This ad was put out by Democrats for Israel, or Democratic Majority for Israel in Iowa. It is an anti-Bernie ad. If none of those things make sense to you, I understand. We should also say that apparently the person who's in charge of this Democratic Majority for Israel was just appointed to one of the committees for the DNC by Tom Perez. What a coincidence. I'm sure that the head of Justice Democrats, if they put out an ad against Joe Biden, I'm sure they'll get appointed to the DNC or something. But here's the ad, and this is the push that we're seeing from you want to call it the establishment Democrats, the more conservative Democrats. I would say sort of those tied, the corporate. This is the push that we're seeing. And it's important to examine this question. This is the ad, some Iowans.
Most important thing is we have to beat Trump.
We've seen the damage that Trump and the Republican Congress have done.
I doubt if Bernie Sanders can beat Trump.
I like Bernie. I think he has great ideas. But Michigan, Pennsylvania, Iowa, they're just not going to vote for a socialist.
I do have some concerns about Bernie Sanders' health, considering the fact that he did have a heart attack.
I think it's very important that the Democrats nominate somebody that can beat Trump.
I don't feel as though Bernie Sanders would do well against Donald Trump.
I just don't think Bernie can beat Trump.
DMFI PAC is responsible for the content of this advertising.
So there it is. The argument is support a Democrat who can defeat Trump. And let's look at this because there's been a couple of pieces that have been put out, and we should pull up this thing too because I'm going to probably need this at one point. I'm going to send it to you right now. Two pieces that came out that I think are indicative of the what we're hearing. One is by Jonathan Chait, and one is by David Frum. Let me just send you this because you're going to need this here. So let's go with David Frum first. Now, I think just in general, the idea of a Republican suggesting who the Democrats nominate is ridiculous, particularly because it's Donald Trump who they could not prevent from winning their own nomination. It's Donald Trump who they handmaiden and midwifed and created their party around in such a way that Donald Trump would win. Bernie Can't Win is the title of the piece by David Frum. His argument is centered around Joe Rogan's, or starts with Joe Rogan's endorsement. But let's get to the, and he says that, and I think he rightly sort of points out, and he does it in the context of an answer that Sanders had in response to a question about the 22 transgender people who were killed in the U.S. last year, 2019. And Sanders said, we need moral leadership in the White House. We need a president who will do everything humanly possible to end all forms of discrimination against transgender community. And then he adds, the African-American community, against Latino, against all minorities in this country. And then he goes on to talk about material benefits that he wants to provide for folks, specifically in these communities. But he's talking about material benefits. Warren stays on, answers the question and stays on the specifics. She starts where Sanders does and then goes in and says, I will use the bully pulpit. And I will change the rules that put people, who get put presumably in federal prison on their birth sex identification rather than current identification. And she's talking a little bit more specifically about. She's talking in a way that is more specific to the transgender community. However, that isn't the same as saying that she's talking about the most important issues to people in the transgender community, right? Because healthcare and housing discrimination may be more important. And neither one of them brings up housing. Sanders brings up healthcare. But she stays very specific. And I think that is a fair assessment of Sanders' approach to these things. I'm not convinced in office that there's going to be really any fundamental difference between the actions that they take, frankly. I think that if transgender activists come to the White House and say, we have a problem with the way that folks are identified in prison, I'm quite confident that that a Sanders administration would respond in the same way that a Warren administration would. But as a candidate, he does not address those narrow issues, but rather looks at ones that he thinks are bigger issues for everyone and may have greater implications for folks who are marginalized in our society. Right? Because generally and this is, I think, the case, is when we talk about a dynamic that happens, whether it's climate change, whether it's healthcare, whether it's housing, the most marginalized in society, those people who have suffered the greatest discrimination, those people who have the least amount of political power, those people who have the least amount of economic power, they are the first persons to suffer from these phenomenons that ultimately may affect the wider population. Right? So climate change hits the most vulnerable and marginalized people first. The lack of health care hits the most marginalized and vulnerable people first. Discrimination, obviously. And so that's his theory. And the question is, from an electoral standpoint, is this a liability in a general election? David Frum seems to think it is. Now, remember, it's not just a generic general election. It's against Donald Trump. And the question they're trying to raise, which is sort of fascinating, or I should say Frum is, and then you will find that Chait is doing the same thing. Frum writes, Trump will terrorize the suburban moderates with the threat that Sanders will confiscate their health insurance and stock holdings, if not their homes. Trump accused Democrats of pro-Ayatollah sympathies for noticing that his story about the killing of Qasem Soleimani was full of holes. In 1980, Sanders joined a left-wing party. Okay, so that's a weird paragraph to just sort of jump from, he's going to take away your private health insurance, and he loved the Ayatollah. Those folks in the suburbs have abandoned Donald Trump. I don't know if they've abandoned the Republican Party. That's what Frum seems to be implying on some level. But they've abandoned Donald Trump. And there is no notice in any of these arguments. First of all, I totally discount the idea that anybody gives a rat's ass of what Bernie Sanders said 30 years ago in print, frankly. I mean, if there's video of him saying death to America and he's marching up and down, I think that could be a problem. But short of that, there is just no voters out there who are on the fence, who are high propensity voters, who are interested in voting against Donald Trump. And it'd be like 30 years ago, Bernie Sanders was out there saying the same thing he's saying now, which is we should not have engaged in a coup in the first place to install a dictator that ended up having blowback. The idea that they put up a video today that Bernie Sanders, where he's saying, when I was a kid, maybe he was 12, when I was a kid, and Fidel Castro had his revolution, I thought it was exciting. And I was excited for it. No one's going to care about that. Maybe in Florida, maybe some older Cubans who will not vote for the Democratic nominee, period, anyways. But no one's going to care about that. The idea that he came back from his honeymoon from the USSR in 1988 and said it was great there. No one cares. The USSR does not exist anymore. This is not an ongoing problem. I think there is an argument that, and Chait will make it, and we'll wait for that. And we should examine the liabilities that Bernie Sanders has. Frum writes, the members of the team around Sanders are experts in Democratic Party factional infighting. I don't even know what that means. But if they are, great. Then they understand politics. They've always been the rule breakers, the people who got inside the other team's decision cycle. I don't even know exactly what he's saying, except for they're good at politics when they're running against people. They have been the Minutemen fighting the Redcoats, picking off the other side's regulars from behind trees and fences. This is all just sort of silly. They have more money, and they have simply, the only thing that makes them Minutemen is that they're getting their money not from corporate forces, but they're getting the same amount of money. They're getting more. Now they are about to experience what happens when a militia faces off in an open field against ruthless modern army with cluster bombs and napalm. First of all, this dynamic happens all the time. Donald Trump was not spending any money. Donald Trump had no operation. Donald Trump did not have the Republican Party around him, yet he took out the establishment of the Republican Party. Where was the napalm then? Where was the cluster bombs that the Bush family, the Bush dynasty had? This is just bizarre. He's just made this means nothing.
Also, given our record in the Middle East and the wars we've fought over there the past 20 years, the militias have done all right.
Yes. I mean, aside from his metaphor being incorrectly applied, it's also on its face, it doesn't make any sense. He writes, the Sanders campaign is a bet that the 2020 race can be won by mobilizing Americans least committed to the political process while alienating and even offending the Americans most committed to it. It's a hell of a gamble. And for what? Now, I can tell you, with even sort of an arm's length distance from people who work on the Sanders campaign, that no one on that campaign has a plan that their process is, their idea is to alienate and offend the Americans most committed to it. I don't think that Bernie Sanders or anyone working for Bernie Sanders, like the way we're going to win is by offending all of the high propensity voters. There may be some confidence in a race against Donald Trump and in a general election that high propensity Democratic voters are going to come out and vote for the Democrat. Which is a safer bet? That the high propensity Democratic voters are going to come out and vote for the Democrat, or the low propensity Democratic voters are going to come out and support a Democrat against Donald Trump? Well, obviously, the safer bet is the high propensity people are going to come out. So you focus on getting the low propensity and you try and figure out how you can manage to do that without keeping your own people at home. I mean, this is the dynamic. This is the key dynamic. And then he goes on to say his two campaigns have discovered something important. The left but not woke idea does have power, including with many members of racial minorities. Sanders seldom talks specifically to non-white voters. His message to them is the same as his message to everyone. Universal health coverage, student debt relief, more redistribution, rich to poor, reducing the power of money in politics. It's true. And he goes on to talk about how Biden maintains still a greater support amongst the black community. But again, these are high propensity Democratic voters we are talking about. And the question is, and the reason why they're supporting Biden is because they think he can win. And if Biden's not there and Bernie Sanders does win the general election, and we're already seeing some movement in these polls, but let's just for the moment, just even take for granted that they're supporting Biden because they think he can win. Well, if he doesn't win if they doesn't win the primary, they're not going to think he can win. And they're going to go to the person who they think has the best chance of beating Donald Trump. And if there is one Democratic nominee and it's Bernie Sanders, then that's going to be the person they're going to vote for. If there are Democratic voters voting on the basis of whether Bernie Sanders or whether a candidate can win against Donald Trump, I can guarantee you that 99.9% of them will be voting in the general election against Donald Trump. There's nobody who's going to say, I don't think that Bernie Sanders can beat Donald Trump, or I don't think, put in any name. Elizabeth Warren. I don't think Pete Buttigieg. I don't think Joe Biden can beat Donald Trump. They're the nominee of the party, so I'm not going to vote for them. I'm going to stay at home and not vote for them because I don't think they could beat Donald Trump, even though they're the only nominee. That's not going to happen. Right? This cuts to the question of whose votes can you afford to take for granted if you have to get other votes? Now, I'm not convinced that you have to take them for granted, the high propensity voters, or to the extent that you do, I definitely don't think you should offend them. But every single, I can assure you that every single person who articulated a problem with the Joe Rogan endorsement, who is committed to voting against Donald Trump, will still vote against Donald Trump. Now, surely there were people who were complained about it who were not committed to voting against Donald Trump, regardless of who the nominee is. And they're using it in a cynical fashion. But they will vote against Donald Trump if that was their intention to begin with. That's just not going to change. It's conceivable you'll pick up some votes because of Joe Rogan. I don't know, but I would imagine. Because American politics, despite what we all want to believe because we're engaged in it more, the vote for a president is not necessarily about ideology. It is not. There are no, the ideological lanes that we track onto these campaigns are not necessarily the ones that average voters do. He goes on to say that Trump seems to be plotting cuts to Medicare and Social Security. These are points of vulnerability. Trump has them. Pressing them, listing them is easy. Pressing them is hard because to press them successfully, candidates must first establish an emotional connection with voters they hope to sway. Suburban women and African Americans are two groups least impressed by Sanders. This is not true. It may be the case of suburban women. I haven't seen the data on this per se. But Bernie Sanders is number 2 in terms of African American support. And again, I haven't seen the data on this. But common sense tells you if this support is driven for Joe Biden based upon his ability to beat Donald Trump, those are high propensity voters. They want to vote against Donald Trump and they want to defeat him. And the reason why Hillary Clinton lost, in part, one of the dozen reasons, the reason why it was so close, the reason why in Michigan and Wisconsin and in Pennsylvania was because she did not motivate the low propensity black vote. There are other reasons. That's one of them. But as long as we're talking about these specific questions, that's what it was. Their vote was on top of it being suppressed, but all of that is the same. We do not have less vote suppression this time around. Let's put it that way. African Americans will show up if inspired. They did in 2008 and in 2012. Suburban women almost always show up. Joe Rogan listeners, they are a longer odds bet. He is just arguing against his own argument. He knows they're going to show up. That's the whole point. How do you inspire these two groups that you say won't show up? That is the low propensity black voters who need to be inspired, who need to feel, even though I agree with what you're saying programmatically, that you're actually going to do it, that you're sincere about it. And then he goes on to say, this is just bizarre. If Biden falters, Democrats have other options available. Are you ready for the options available that are going to inspire suburban women? And remember now, the whole game is how does Donald Trump suppress, I'm not talking about disenfranchise, but I'm saying suppress the vote of different constituencies in the Democratic Party. Does anybody think that Joe Biden isn't a ripe target to alienate female voters? Does anybody think that Joe Biden is not a ripe target to alienate voters who care about corruption? Forget whether or not you think he's corrupt or not. Just in terms of like what's out there in terms of a narrative. Please also remember that Democrats used to call him the senator from MBNA. Is there anybody out there who doesn't think that that he is ripe to suppress black voters when he has said publicly, I was good friends with segregationists? I mean, here is a dirty little secret. The USSR, it does not exist anymore. Bernie Sanders we could have video of Bernie Sanders saying the Pledge of Allegiance to the Soviet flag, and that wouldn't mean anything because the Soviet Union does not exist anymore. When Joe Biden says I was good friends with segregationists, the secret is racism still exists. It's still a problem. He goes on to say if Biden falters, Democrats have other options available. Michael Bloomberg and Pete Buttigieg, who are also exploring the left but not woke terrain blazed by Sanders. This is bizarre. So he is saying the left but not woke is the one to win. But Biden has far more liabilities in this regard. And the idea that Michael Bloomberg or Pete Buttigieg are going to inspire low propensity black voters is insane. They're writing stories in the Times and the Washington Post how people who are even Buttigieg supporters working on his campaign, black people, Latino people, feel like they're getting crapped upon within the campaign. Never mind what happened in South Bend. Michael Bloomberg, until 6 or 8 months ago, was supporting a policy that not only has been shown not to have contributed to the reduction of crime, but basically made a criminal out of every black male under the age of 25 in this city. And a criminal in the sense that, like, we're going to stop you at any time, whatever we want. Like, we just don't care. We're the cops. You're the guys we're after. These are the people who are going to motivate these voters? This is insane. That's David Frum. Honestly, this is a guy who, whatever license he has to spew this stuff should be revoked. Here is Jonathan Chait. And he says that polarization has given any major party nominee a high enough floor of support that the term unelectable has no real place in the discussion. That said, the totality of the evidence suggests Sanders is an extremely, perhaps uniquely risky nominee. We do not have a particularly... I'm going to say we do not have a particularly strong slate of candidates who can be elected president. There is no Obama who has tremendous political gifts. There is no Clinton who had tremendous political gifts. We don't have one of those in this race. We're also in a very, very specific era with a president that is, with an incumbent president that is really largely, at least in the modern era, completely, I would say, totally unique in terms of their rise. First business person, first person who was not involved in institutional party politics, it's considered uniquely corrupt, who has been grotesque. So the idea that you could even make the assessment that any of these nominees are uniquely risky is absurd. It's absurd. They're all risky, or they're all not. I mean, the biggest risk is that you're going to have somebody who simply is not like physically up to the task. And I think that really only Joe Biden fulfills that. To say that there's anybody uniquely risky, it has to be Joe Biden. Because Joe Biden is like, he's not taking any questions. He's losing his cool at we could play a video of him going after supporters, like a half a dozen supporters. The latest one, let's play this clip of Joe Biden. Here's a guy who come up to ask him, Joe Biden is so off his game that he is projecting onto people now stuff. Look how easy it was to get under his skin. Joe Biden's approached by a very mild-mannered voter. And Joe Biden is so thrown off by this that he's lobbing weird accusations at him. Here, play this.
I'm going to support you if you win the nomination because we got to get rid of Trump. But what are we going to do about climate change? Now, you say you're against pipelines, but then you want to replace these gas lines. That's not going to work. We got to stop building and replacing pipelines. You got to go vote for somebody else.
All right, thanks so much, sir. We're going to have you here. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
I'm going to vote you in the general if you treat me right.
Yeah, I know. Well, I'm not.
Well, can I have a
Look, you're asking a picture of me. You're coming up and telling me you don't support me.
No.
My plan. Yeah, you did. You said
I said I would support you in the general.
In the general. I'm looking for a primary.
We're happy to get a number. We can follow up.
That's what I'm looking for, okay?
Just because we're finding it.
You believe that Bernie can do something by 2030?
I'm actually supporting Tom Steyer.
Well, that's good. He's the guy that did
Thanks
more
so much,
coal
sir. We have
mines.
a long line.
All right, pause it. So, do you see what happened here? The guy comes up and says, "Look, I want you to know right at the beginning, I'm going to support you in the general, but I want to talk to you about climate change. I'm concerned about your policy about pipelines." And he goes, "Go vote for somebody else." Well, I'm going to support you in the general. Yeah, I don't care. I need you to vote right now. So I'm not going to waste my time talking to you. And the guy says, and he goes, "Go vote for Bernie." And he grabs him by the lapel. Like, what kind of guy does this? He physically grabs him by the lapel. "Go vote for Bernie." "Oh, I'm actually voting for Tom Steyer." Now, here's the problem. This guy's so defensive now that he just alienated someone who could have voted for him in the caucus, because Tom Steyer has a very good chance of not making it, not being viable. And so when this guy is sitting in that caucus and Tom Steyer does not have the votes, if this guy's caucusing, he's going to go to somebody else. And Joe Biden just immediately gave away that vote. This is not somebody who is equipped to run a political campaign. It is grueling. It is tiring. If you are letting it get to you in this way, you're simply not equipped to do it. So if you're talking about somebody who's uniquely risky, there's evidence for Joe Biden being uniquely risky. I'm not even sure you can say uniquely risky, but if that's what you're going to write, if you're going to say that one candidate is uniquely risky, and I've just shown you that, and there's a half a dozen of those, literally a half a dozen of those exchanges, maybe more, where Joe Biden is alienated potential votes in the primary, in a caucus. This is literally the first sentence of the second graph. Sanders is uniquely risky. In other words, no one else is as risky as him. If you do not think that Joe Biden is as risky as a bet as Bernie Sanders, then your premise is completely skewed. If you do not think that Pete Buttigieg, a man who is married to another man, when we are 15 years out from when having amendments to state constitutions that gay people should not be able to marry is not also risky. If we've just gone through an election where misogyny undoubtedly played a role, was it determinative? I don't know. But that's also risky. It's all risky. And as soon as you say that one person's uniquely risky, and it's not the one who is actually like literally saying like, "I don't vote for me," and because you're voting for Bernie. Oh, it's Tom Steyer. Oh, shoot. I just blew a chance of picking up an actual vote in a caucus state. I'm sorry. This is just, it gives you a sense of just sort of like how well-reasoned this piece is. But he goes on to say that this guy is like, now he does make the point. No party nomination, with the exception of Barry Goldwater in 1964, has put forth a presidential nominee with the level of downside risk exposure as Sanders-led ticket would bring. Now, this is just the downside risk exposure he's talking about is not just that Sanders would lose. It is that it's going to hurt down ticket votes. That's conceivable. But the evidence is unclear. He goes on to list positions that Sanders has which are unpopular. He supports things that are popular, but some that are unpopular. Replacing all private health insurance with a government plan. Part of that is how it's phrased and whatnot, but the polling is that as it's been expressed now, it does not have 50% popularity. Banning fracking does not have 50% popularity. Letting prisoners vote, I think, is probably very unpopular, broadly speaking. Decriminalizing the border, I'm not so sure about that. It's probably close. Giving free health care to undocumented immigrants, not popular. Eliminating ICE, not popular. He goes, I'm only listing Sanders positions that are intensely unpopular. I'm not including positions like national rent control and phasing out nuclear energy that I consider ill-advised, but probably won't harm him much with voters. We don't know what's going to harm him for voters. We also know that building a wall was very unpopular. We just don't know. He goes on to say that Sanders seems to have overtaken Warren in part because she spent most of 2019 closing the ideological gap between the two candidates, which made the Democratic Party elites justifiably skeptical about her electability, thereby kneecapping her viability as a trans-factional candidate. But Warren tries to couch her positions in a framework of reforming and revitalizing capitalism that is indeed intended to reassure ideologically skeptical voters. So his argument is that the reason why people abandoned Warren was because when she adopted Medicare for all, it signaled to people who worried about electability that wouldn't work in a general. But the fact is that doesn't jibe with the actual time. She was for Medicare for all more so in her ascent than she was in her descent. Her descent came when she started having to backpedal on Medicare for all. When she started to have to explain, when she could not respond or could not weather the storm that came with, I care about costs, not about taxes. Do you understand? Like, her electability issues came up when she was unable to maintain the tension she was trying to create here. Instead of just being strong and wrong, she tried to be right with everybody. That is not the same as saying the position she held, Medicare for all, was problematic. It is the fact that she signaled she could be knocked off her game, which was the initial concern about the DNA. The point is that what we're seeing here is that electability, because we're starting to see Biden falter, right? And why are we seeing Biden falter? Because he's showing a shakiness. His positions have not changed. What we're seeing here is that people make a decision about electability who are outside of politics as a job. It is not based exclusively, and maybe not even predominantly, by their positions, at least in this environment. It is based upon a perception that they are unwavering, that they cannot, that they're not, they are strong and it doesn't matter. That they're exuding confidence and they're exuding consistency. Every one of these candidates has a narrative that is a liability. With Warren, it's that you can't be sure where she stands on something. I happen to think that's not true. I happen to think, though, that her campaign has been addressing questions that they shouldn't address. They should just be like, I got this. I don't have to give you a financing plan for my Medicare for All. Bernie Sanders hasn't. He's given 4 areas in which the money could come from. But he's like, that's all you need for this point. We don't give you, when we talk about a $70 billion a year increase in the military budget, we don't have to, we cut taxes. All we gave you was information on where it will not come from. Warren did not need to do that, even to maintain her, I have a plan for that. They got caught up too much in what was a metaphor, and they started, they like, oh, I need to have a single plan, a narrow, granular plan for everything. They did not understand her core brand proposition, as it were. There's a problem with the campaign. That's what people are reacting to. Some people are reacting to it viscerally, like they're not making the analysis that there's something wrong with the campaign. They just feel it because she's not exuding the confidence. She should have kept saying, look, for me, it's about cost. You want to talk about taxes? That doesn't matter. At the end of the day, the money in the pocket of the middle class will be more than it was before. She should have just kept saying that. And they would have kept hammering her. And then you know what? They would have moved on because our news cycle is so fast that no one's going to be, there's not going to be any, the more that they would have hammered that, the more the voters would have appreciated it and understood it. But her campaign, they blinked. That's why she went down. That's why when Joe Biden is blinking all over the place, like literally and figuratively blinking, that's why he's dropping. But Chait sees it through his ideological lens. That it was her embrace of Medicare for all, but yet everyone knows she embraced that from the beginning. Compounding those vulnerabilities is a long history of radical associations. This is Chait saying the socialist label has grown less unpopular, but it's still not popular. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. In part because of, put up the that image. The one from McCain that I said. In part because of this. McCain says Obama wants socialism. This is October 2008. This is right before the election, incidentally. And he said this in North Carolina, which I should tell you, Barack Obama won. First time a Democrat won that in a long time. Maybe they didn't care he was a socialist. Maybe this didn't fall into a narrative, although it certainly was the narrative of the Republicans. And here's the problem with the idea that this socialism is, because remember, the name of the game is how do you depress the Democratic vote? Being inconsistent can depress the Democratic vote because it says maybe she's not going to do what she's going to say she's going to do. Being corrupt, and I'm not saying that these people are these things. That's up for you to believe or not. But everybody, there's nobody who's listening to the sound of my voice doesn't believe that these narratives exist. You can say they exist unfairly. Fine. I don't care about that. Being corrupt is something that could depress the Democratic vote. Being racist is something that could depress the Democratic vote. I don't know if Pete Buttigieg is racist, but he definitely, his own campaign has a problem. Can depress the vote. And I think the idea that if Pete Buttigieg had been in the lead, his lack of actual material deliverance and his flip-flopping would be in a narrative. Now, he may pull something out, in which case, all power to him. The narrative for Bernie Sanders, what is it? He is a radical socialist. How does this depress the Democratic vote? He was in favor of the Ayatollah. Is this really going to depress the low propensity Democratic voters? He praised the Soviet Union. Is this going to depress the low propensity? They don't care about these things. The only thing that I think that could actually depress the low propensity Democratic vote would be if they believed that Bernie Sanders was lying about his proposals. And I do think that there is, and I think people need to acknowledge this, there could be stuff that comes out of like the fact that like he's got 2 houses, 3 houses, or whatever it is. He made $1 million on his book. The question is, does that information in a general election targeted to specific people have enough to make those people think that, yes, Sanders is saying he's going to do X, Y, and Z. I love all that. I don't believe him. I don't know. If there is a risk to Bernie Sanders, that is it. But you do have Republicans and Fox people and this and that. Maybe they'll change their tune later. But they all joke. Even George Stephanopoulos the other day on ABC television. One thing you got to say for Bernie is he's been saying the same thing for 30 years. He believes in what he's saying. That's the one thing they concede about Sanders. And the problem, too, if you're trying to sell this thing that he doesn't believe what he believes in, is the other message that you're going to push first is that he's a radical socialist and he's going to do all these things. And then to try and flip and say, wait a second, I'm going to counter that narrative with he's not going to try and do these things. That's going to be a very hard trick to pull off. You can't say about Joe Biden, he's super corrupt. But the problem with him is that he's really, really not corrupt at all. It's just, that's the problem they have. That's why it's so hard for them to lay a hand on Bernie Sanders. Now, in a general election, they're not going to be able to say things like in a Democratic election, like I think it's perfectly like, he's old. He had a heart attack. That is a liability. But in a general election, no, that is not going to depress Democratic votes. Nobody's going to say, I'm not going to vote for Bernie Sanders because he's too old against Donald Trump. It's just not going to happen. And then the question is, will you lose a bunch of moderates because they're afraid of Bernie Sanders? Or, more importantly, will down-ticket moderates? Elisa Slotkin is someone that they talk about. She is in a Michigan district directly north of Ann Arbor. She was the one who we talked about her in the context of impeachment, where she came out and said she's going to do impeachment. And she was one of those frontline Democrats who came out and said she was going to do it. She does not support Medicare for all, but she just supports a public option, having government negotiate drug prices. I'm not sure where she is on things like free college, et cetera, et cetera. She is in a R plus, I don't know, 5 or 6 or 7 Michigan district. And the question is, does Bernie Sanders hurt her there? I don't know. I don't know if Bernie Sanders hurts her more than Pete Buttigieg would or Elizabeth Warren would. Maybe Joe Biden doesn't hurt her. We just don't know. We don't know. There is a lot of political science that argues that actually doesn't necessarily work like that more often than not. That the coattails actually go the opposite direction. That local candidates feed into this as much as the presidential candidates. We don't know. Getting back to Chait. He said, the quality of the candidate is not the only or even the main determinant of election outcomes, and having popular views is only one factor in the quality of candidates. Still, political science has generally found that, all things being equal, the electorate tends to punish ideological extreme candidates. Yes, but things are not equal. This is not a vacuum. This is the most unique election we've had in modern times. There's just no doubt about it, right? I mean, there's no question about this. And then he goes on to create a little bit of a straw man. That is why Bernie's succeeding. And it's really just an argument he's having with people who are online. Hillary Clinton's surprising defeat created an opportunity for the left to promote an alternative theory for how the party could and should compete. It deemed Donald Trump's win a sign that capitalism had created such distress that voters were now rejecting conventional politicians altogether and open to radical alternatives who might promise to smash the failing system. Now, he is conflating ideological radicalism with an anti-establishment quality. You can have, those things can be distinct. Barack Obama was an anti-establishment candidate. He didn't use a language but change. That's what that is. Change. And this is going to change America. And really what the unspoken anti-establishment or establishment he was running against was the white establishment, was the dominance, was white supremacy in its sort of like most academic sense. People like change now. They are unhappy with things. Donald Trump ran as a change agent. And the question isn't what they're going to do to change. I don't think people get that granular with it. I think if they did, people would realize, like, what is exactly that Obama is going to change? Wasn't a policy thing. It was just a feel. And people were like, I'm willing to do it. What was Trump going to change for people? He goes on by saying, indeed, by this reasoning, Democrats would do better, not worse, by nominating a more left-wing candidate. See, there he is, again, conflating the outsider with political ideology. Pete Buttigieg, the reason why he was doing so well early on, I'm convinced, was less about his ideology and more about the idea that he was outside, that he was fresh. That's why everybody's running against Washington, who could distance themselves more credibly from the discredited establishment. See, Chait makes the mistake of, one, understanding that the establishment represents a form of whatever you want to call it, center right, center left, whatever he would call it, and that the left-wing candidates represent an anti-establishment, but he's conflating these things. He thinks they're the same thing, and he's using them interchangeably, and they're not. Because people don't look at the ideology. They look at the idea of, like, is this guy different? Is this woman different? Are they going to change things? It doesn't matter what the change is going to be. And he goes, this theory had two clear tests. Jeremy Corbyn, which I think is silly. I'm sorry. Jeremy Corbyn had all sorts of liabilities that aren't the same as Bernie Sanders. Again, Jeremy Corbyn is the perfect run if you are ideological in your analysis, which I will grant. There's definitely people on the left here who were completely ideological in their analysis. Chait doesn't realize that he is too. It's just he's coming from a different ideology, but he's just as ideological to presume that there's this huge lesson to be learned with Corbyn. And he goes, a second example closer to home is even more relevant. In the months leading up to the 2018 midterm elections, the Democratic Party was the subject of bitter and widespread criticism from its left wing. The party's strategy was to flip the House by recruiting moderate candidates who would avoid controversial left-wing positions and instead focus attention on Trump's agenda, especially his effort to eliminate Obamacare. The left predicated the strategy would fail. Only an inspiring progressive agenda could mobilize enough voters to win back the House. I'm not sure that's actually what the left was predicting. I think the left was saying this is an opportunity to actually push the margins because people are going to be voting against Trump. But put that aside. And then he quotes critiques Adam Green, Neil Soroka from Democracy for America, Zephyr Teachout, Ryan Cooper saying their strategy was stupid. And as we now know, he writes, it was a good strategy to win the House. Democrats flipped 40 seats. Tellingly, while progressives managed to nominate several candidates in red districts, Kara Eastman in Nebraska, Richard Ojeda in West Virginia, and others, any of whose victory they would have cited as proof that left-wing candidates can win in Trump districts, not a single one of them prevailed in November. Our revolution went 0 for 22. Now, that's including primaries, incidentally. Now, Kara Eastman and Rachel Bitkofer, who I think agrees that Sanders is risky, but not for the same reasons, discounts what Chait is saying. She was able to predict before we even knew who the primary winners were how many seats the Democrats would pick up, which suggests that the reason why the Democrats won had nothing to do with their positions. It had to do with people wanting to come out to vote against Donald Trump. What we do know is that the DCCC put a lot of money behind their candidates in the primaries. And with a candidate like Kara Eastman in Nebraska, they put nothing behind her. No support. She lost by barely 2 percentage points. And everybody agrees that were there support there, she would have won. So the bottom line is, I don't know if you need to have progressive challengers in every red district or every purple district to win. I don't know if that's the case. But that's not the argument that Chait's making. Chait's making that the fact that moderates won in these purple districts in the general is evidence that Bernie Sanders can't. And there's no basis for that whatsoever. In fact, I would argue the other, because we knew that the candidates, regardless of their positions, would win. Or at least it was predicted by Bitkofer that maybe looking at the ideological question is not relevant in this instance. And really, where did Hillary Clinton lose votes? Whose votes did she lose that didn't make her win? It was reliable Democratic voters who did not come out. 4 million Obama to nobody votes. Hundreds of thousands of Obama to nobody votes in those states, those contested states. Those are the votes you need. You don't need to have people in Nebraska vote for you. They're not going to. They're not going to vote for any of the Democratic candidates. I can tell you that right now. So I think it's important to... he goes on, at this point, there's hardly any serious evidence to believe that the best strategy to defeat Trump is to mobilize voters with a radical economic agenda. I don't know if that's the best strategy. I think the question is not so much what the best strategy is. The question is, who's the best candidate? Who's the least risky of candidates? And I don't know that there's an answer for this. But I can tell you there's definitely an answer to the question, is Bernie Sanders uniquely risky? And the answer is absolutely no. And he says, Trump's election strategy revolves around painting his opponents as radical and dangerous. You may not like me, he will argue, but my opponents are going to turn over the apple cart. What? This is what he is saying that Trump is going to do. that they're going to...
It's not quoted.
Huh? No, that's not a quote. Because Donald Trump is not going to say that. Is there anybody in the suburbs... Because this is who supposedly that message would resonate with, right? Is there anybody in the suburbs who's going like, yeah, the apple cart feels really stable right now. This is how I want to live the next 4 years. With this Trump stuff is going to die. Like, I don't want to go from the frying pan to the fire. Is there anybody in the suburbs who are saying like, this is what I want politics to be like? They just want it to be quiet. And the only thing they know is that with Donald Trump, it's not. And they could say Bernie Sanders may be just as loud, but how could he be? And let's face it, there was a lot of people who said the Republican Party will squelch Donald Trump. They will keep him in line. Don't worry. It'll be okay. People can say that about the Democratic Party and they'll be right in terms of Sanders, or it's a better bet that they're going to constrain Bernie Sanders more than the Republicans were ever going to constrain Donald Trump. All right. I completely miscalculated on how long I was going to be talking about
I think we need to get a clock for above your monitor.
Sorry, folks. This is the era we're living in. We're going to take a break, go to the fun half. I'm going to take phone calls and sorry about that. Remember, your support makes the show possible. Join themajority.report.com. That was 45 minutes. I wanted to make that shorter so that you could pass it around, but we'll clip it. But I do think it's necessary to take these critiques seriously. And then realize that they're unserious. That's the only way that you can. 646-257-3920 is the number. This show relies on your support. Join themajority.report.com. Also check out the AM Quickie, amquickie.com. Just coffee.coop, fair trade coffee, tea, or chocolate. Please check out all of the supporting shows, TMBS, the Antifada. Check out the Nomiki Show. Patreon.com, right, Dorsey? Patreon.com/The Nomiki Show. And Literary Hangover, of course. We'll put links to all of those in the podcast and the YouTube description. See you in the fun half. Left is best. Jamie and I may have a disagreement.
Yeah, you can't just say